We just want to say before we start too that we think it's really excellent that the school system is wanting to bring in some information about these really important issues that we're here to talk about today. Both of them are kind of difficult issues. They're not issues that are fun to deal with when they happen, but they're really important. So we just want to give kudos to the Catholic school system for asking us to do this specifically, because it's a real important issues. Okay, so this is going to be a two-part presentation, and we're going to start. Well, both of these issues are things that kids today might deal with. Kids today have really complex lives, and I think sometimes back to when I was in high school, or even much more recent than that, we didn't have things like the internet and social media, and that has changed things a whole lot for kids. And their world is really very different than it was for us when we were in high school. So they have pretty complex lives. And so this presentation deals with two separate things that they might experience. And they're two things that are somewhat related. There is some overlap, but they're really very separate things as well. And we're going to talk about how they're separate and how there is an overlap between the two in this presentation. And those two things that we're going to talk about are, first of all, self-harming behaviors, or self-injury more accurately describes what we're going to talk about, and then thoughts of suicide. And of course, both of these things are difficult things. They're hard to talk about. They're hard to have to deal with for the kids who are experiencing them, and also for parents and families. So it's important that we're able to talk about them. So we're going to start. Oh, before we start with one of them, I just want to talk a little bit about, well, what is typical for teenagers and adolescents in terms of emotional responses to things, in terms of behavior, all of that sort of thing. Obviously, as any of you who might have adolescents or teenagers, or you work with them, will know that a certain degree of moodiness is really common. And it's actually very normal as well, especially when kids are going through, moving through puberty and all of the changes that brings. One of the things that can happen is that there really are dramatic effects on mood and that sort of thing. So a certain degree of moodiness and emotional difficulty is very normal for kids. So how do we know then when what we're observing in our kids is something that is beyond that typical or that normal range, and something that maybe we should be worried about? Well, there's no exact science to that, but maybe the easiest way to say it is, you know your children the best. And so you know if there are things that you're noticing that are maybe really out of character. Something seems to have changed. Do the behaviors and the emotions seem to be excessive? And does the child seem to have a great deal of difficulty, maybe more than they used to, in regulating their emotions in a normal way? So if they do become really frustrated about something, they're not able to do that regulation of that emotion in kind of a normal way. So you know your kids better than anybody else, and you will notice when there are things that happen that are sort of out of the ordinary. So that's what we're talking about with both of these issues, is emotional responses and behaviors that are outside of that typical or normal realm. Okay? So we're going to start with self-harming behavior. Or, as I said, more specifically, what we're talking about is self-injury, so physical injuries to oneself. So just a definition here, it is deliberate, self-affected, low lethality bodily harm of a socially unacceptable nature, and is carried out to reduce some kind of psychological stress. So just in a little bit of easier language, it's done on purpose, it's done to oneself. It causes a low to moderate degree of physical damage, not viewed favorably by society, and it's a response to some sort of stress that the person feels.
Can I just make one comment? Just also to understand that self-injury has to happen more than one time. So you might have a child or an adolescent try it one time. That doesn't mean that they're going to start to engage in self-injuring behaviors. It may have just been a one-time event. So research is very quick to identify. If a child does it one time, that's not necessarily the coping skill that they're going to be using. It's something that they were exploring. So that's just something for you guys all to be aware of.
Yeah. And maybe it's just out of curiosity or something like that, that it happens one time. And if that's all it is, then that's not really something to be concerned about, and that's not what we're talking about. So so how are kids doing this? If they're harming themselves, what is it actually that they're doing? So there's a number of different things, and the big one at the top there, 72%, is cutting yourself. Burning, 35%. Self-hitting, about 30%. Interference with wound healing, 22%. Hair pulling, 10%. Bone breaking, 8%. That's a very small percentage. And kind of a multi-method, 78%. So lots of different things there that happen in terms of the specific kinds of behavior. How common is it? About 1% of the population. But when you're looking at the age group that we're really here talking about today, adolescents and teens, it's higher than that. It might be up around 18%. So if you think of any high school, obviously there will be people who are engaging in this sort of behavior. Typical age that it starts, now these aren't hard and fast rules either, but the typical age is around 14, 15 years, kind of the onset of high school. Sometimes it's a little bit younger than that, sometimes a little bit later. And the average age where it stops is usually around 18. So it usually happens in a window of time there through the high school years and through those teen years. In kind of a 5 to 10 year window. Now again, that's not a hard and fast rule. We work with people who are adults in their 30s or 40s, and sometimes they're still doing some self-harming behavior. But when you look at the larger percentages or numbers, this is kind of the time frame in which it's happening. And in terms of gender, it occurs both among boys and girls, but it's more common among females. And the way in which it is done also differs between genders. Girls tend to cut more, where with boys it's more things like maybe punching a wall or something, or hitting themselves, that sort of thing. Did you need to add anything to that? Or okay. But very definitely happens among both genders. Does it mean that the person is having thoughts of suicide? The good news is usually it doesn't. Now there's some overlap here, which is like Natasha said before, we're going to talk about that a little bit. But usually it is not about thoughts of suicide. The two things happen for very different reasons. Suicidal behavior happens to escape life, to kind of end all feeling. It's associated with hopelessness and helplessness, right? So it's very final. Where this behavior, self-harming, self-injury, is an attempt to feel better in a strange way. It's to obtain some sort of relief, and it actually involves a degree of control over one's emotions. So they really do happen for very different reasons. And sometimes when there is self-harming behavior, it's actually happening to avoid suicidal behavior. Okay, so there are different things, but there is this overlap, which is important to understand too. And so that's why we need to be very cautious. Anytime that a child or a young person is self-harming, they should be seen by a mental health professional who can assess that situation and see if in fact there is any connection with suicidal thinking. And so to rule that out, but either way, whether there is or there isn't, figuring out what kind of strategies are best to put in place to help this child to learn some different coping skills. Okay? And the other reason, of course, we need to be cautious with this is that the self-harming behavior, the self-injury, can become more severe over time. Sometimes the actions become more severe for the young person to kind of get the same effect that they got from it initially, and it can become more lethal, and sometimes can even be fatal, even when that was not the intent. Okay, so obviously that's another good reason that we need to be very cautious as well. Just some things that might give us a heads up, or that might be sort of connected with someone who might be more at risk of using self-injury. So things like substance abuse. So these are things that might be happening in conjunction with self-harm. Substance abuse, eating disorders. I think it's quite common for there to be self-injury with eating disorders. General mental health problems, depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress specifically, a history of physical or sexual abuse, feelings of abandonment, family conflict, a significant loss of some kind, or a death. Now, these are just some of the things that might be connected. You're not necessarily going to see all of these things or any of these things. It might be something else, but these are some of the more common things that you might see in conjunction with self-injury. And behaviors that you might see, mood swings, and again, as I said in the beginning, beyond that typical range of moodiness. In addition to things like poor self-esteem, poor impulse control, sadness, anger, anxiety, depression, inability to see the positive in anything. So just kind of having a really kind of a dark or negative outlook. And one of the things that you might see very often, especially when kids try to hide the fact that they are injuring themselves, which happens quite frequently, is that a kid might have a tendency to wear long pants or not want to go to gym because they have to wear shorts or wear long sleeves, or you might see kids that wear sweatbands on their wrists, that sort of thing, in an attempt to cover up those marks so that nobody can see them. So if you see that sort of thing, or if a child is unwilling to go to gym class or is always, seeming to be covering themselves up, then that might be an indicator that something's happening.
Can I just,
Yep.
sorry, interject again?
Yep.
Just in some of the readings that I was doing and just in some of the work that I've done, just some of the risk factors that you need to pay attention to as well is just that lack of social support. So do they have a peer group that they connect with or not have that peer group? Being female will already put them, just because females and cutting behaviors, again, it increases that risk, low self-esteem, as Dave spoke to. Also, an association with peers who self-injured was found to significantly influence adolescent girls' own self-injury. So if they're in a peer group where their friends are engaging in these behaviors, you might see that contagion effect a little bit. So, but those are risk factors. Doesn't mean if your child's hanging out with somebody who's self-harming, they're going to self-harm. No, but it does increase. It just is another risk factor to pay attention to.
Yeah. So why does it happen? If we're saying that generally speaking, it's not about having suicidal thoughts, which it isn't, then why? And we've already mentioned that in some way or another, it is an attempt on the part of the young person to deal with their stress. And there's a number of different things that young people tell us and that you see in the research as well. And these are some of the more common ones here. So they say that it provides relief from intense, unpleasant emotions like anger, frustration, depression, loneliness. So you could think it of as kind of redirecting themselves away from those really uncomfortable, unhappy feelings, and the focus then goes to something else. So that's one reason. Provides some stimulation or a sense of feeling alive when a person feels emotionally numb. And maybe, for example, if somebody is a victim of abuse and there's that kind of a numb feeling that they have, this is something that really kind of gives them the opposite effect. It really helps them to feel sort of alive, to replace that numbness for a short period of time. In some cases, it can be a form of self-punishment when an individual feels worthless, bad, or unworthy of being loved. So maybe a young person who just has very poor self-esteem, maybe some specific things have happened that are making them feel badly about themselves, and so sometimes it's a form of punishing themselves. A lot of kids report kind of a rapid reduction in tension when self-harming, and that happens like instantly, they say. And maybe one of the reasons for that is that just like any kind of a physical injury that happens for any reason, one of the physiological things that happens in our body is a release of endorphins, which can produce, a self or a soothing effect, and even in some cases, kind of a sense of euphoria. So there's a way it really is a way to regulate emotions. Some say that they don't feel any pain. Others do, but they say that that's why they do it, that the physical pain is better than the emotional pain. A few more reasons why young people will engage in this. Increases feelings of being in control. Very often, if a young person feels there's all kinds of things happening in their life and they're not in control of any of it, this is one thing that they have complete control over, and that no one else kind of can interfere with. It's usually a solitary event, and And so it gives them that feeling of being in control of something. As Natasha just said, occasionally there's this copycat effect, or kind of a contagion effect, where if you have one or two kids in a social circle that are doing this, then that might influence others as well. It may not, but sometimes that happens. Sometimes, but usually not, it's an attention-seeking behavior. As I said before, more often kids will try to cover up their cuts and their scars and that sort of thing. But sometimes it's an attention-seeking behavior if they feel invisible or insignificant, or they don't know how to put into words what it is that they're struggling with. Then this is a way for them to communicate something that they may not be able to with words because they don't know how. Okay? So as you can see from those, there's a wide variety of reasons why kids do this. And all of them, in one way or another, are about dealing with deep emotions and with stress that they feel. Okay? Just a few quotations from some kids. The pain is there to remind me that I'm still alive. I have a tendency to hurt myself physically when I'm hurting inside. Cutters cut for the satisfaction of being in control of something. So there you can see in all of those that it's about dealing with some sort of a stressor, feeling like you're in control of something. But obviously, it is not the ideal method to cope with stress. And when we want to help kids when we know that this is happening, to learn some healthier methods to deal with the same stressors that they're choosing to deal with in this way. So there's all kinds of reasons why, obviously, and they're pretty obvious, why it's not a healthy way to cope with stressors. Damages self-esteem further and might damage relationships as well. It might further isolate an individual rather than creating bonds, because again, it's very often, usually I think, something that is sort of done in isolation. Takes the place of genuine healthy expression of emotion and communication with others. So that's one of the things that we try to help kids with, is learning how to communicate what that is that's going on inside of them that's causing a lot of stress or emotional distress, and using their words to communicate that so that they don't have to communicate it in this way. A couple more reasons why it's really important to look for another way. It might provide temporary relief, and that's what kids tell us, but it often leaves individuals feeling empty, guilty, angry for not being able to control those impulses. So the relief that they feel, even though it's very real, really is usually very temporary. And then they may be looking to do it again after some time, but in the meantime, they may be feeling some of these guilty feelings about what they're doing. And of course, physically, it can often leave permanent scars long after the self-harm behavior ends. Sometimes if the cutting is just kind of more like superficial scratches, then it won't. But other times if the cuts are deeper, then absolutely it can leave some lifelong scars. And it can inadvertently lead to very serious physical injury. I mentioned this before, and even death when that is not the intention at all, and especially if the behavior gets to be more severe as time goes by. So Natasha is going to come now and talk a little bit about how we can identify this a little bit more and what we can do to support kids. So
All right. So discovering self-injury. Finding out that your child is engaging in self-injury can be very difficult to understand. You need to be aware of your own reactions, because it's going to bring up a lot of stuff for yourself as parents, as professionals, as caregivers. Reactions might be anger, might be frustration, you might be sad, there might be feelings of guilt, confusion and worry, shock and denial. What you have to acknowledge is that there's going to be a lot of emotions rising, and that's okay. Those are normal. That's how your body is going to respond, or how you're going to approach the situation. But in order to be helpful for your child, you need to be in check of those emotions, and not all emotions are helpful for your child when you're going to go and approach them. So I'm going to speak a little bit about what to do. So I want you to be opening up those lines of communication, showing that you care. That initial reaction and that first conversation that you're going to have is going to greatly impact your child. It may affect how much they're going to talk and trust you. Every situation, every child, every person is going to be different in the way that they handle the situation. The relationship between you and your child's going to, mom and child might be very different than dad and child. So just being aware that you want to just start to open those lines of communication. Like I said, be aware of your own emotions. Don't ignore the problem. It's often a sign of distress. May indicate other mental health difficulties. Although it is tempting maybe to see it as a fad or a stage, that's not in your child's best interest. You need to build trust during that initial conversation because you can play a very important role in supporting your child as they learn healthier ways to cope. So like I said, be aware of your own emotions. If you're angry, it might not be a good time to go and have that conversation. Don't ignore, build trust during that initial conversation. So how can you help? Accept their feelings for what they are. Be honest about your level of concern. Check your own emotions. Be non-judgmental. Listen. It's so important. I get so many parents coming into my office and they just want to solve their child's problems or help them feel better. And so they'll jump right into that problem-solving stage, and I'll say, whoa, step back. Because what they need right now is just for you to listen and say, you must be feeling really, really bad right now. Ask open-ended questions. So an example might be, how can I help? This must be really tough for you right now. Or can you share with me what's been happening lately? Be patient. Reassure them. How can I help? How can I support you? So I already touched on the listening. If your child is at immediate risk, so if this is beyond self-harming behavior and it's hitting into that realm of some serious suicidal ideations or suicide intent, you need to attend to that. And Dave's going to speak a little bit later on in the presentation just about the importance of addressing that. But right now we're going to stick on the self-harming. So if your child refuses to talk about it at first, that's okay. You're not going to get them necessarily to, have this deep-hearted conversation. It might be difficult for them. Repeat your concerns. Let them know that you care, you're concerned, and tell them that you're going to try and have that conversation again later. Take your child seriously. It's important. Avoid the power and control struggles. That's not going to get anybody anywhere. Their actions are not your fault. The parent-child relationship strongly influences a child and a parent's emotional state, so it's going to play off of each other. That relationship can play a great factor in helping your child move forward to getting the support and help that they need. So just being aware of that. Things to avoid. Yelling, lecturing, put downs, punishments, invasions of privacy, ultimatums, you stop or else, threats, self-blame. So it's important for you guys for anybody to acknowledge that you don't want to be saying, how could you do this? Why did you do that to me? This hurts me so much. That's not going to aid them in supporting them moving forward. It's very important to look at the self-blame because I worry about parents and saying, putting all this guilt on them. That's not what this is about either. It's about making sure you're in a good spot to be able to support your child. So we want to remember that they've used self-harming or self-injury as a way to cope. It's been a strategy for them. We want to respond to it, but we also want to make sure how are we reacting. Not underreacting, but not overreacting either. You can't, as parents, treat self-injury yourself. If your child is engaging in self-injury, and there are a number of other concerning factors. So I have a dysregulated mood, and Dave was very good to identify developmentally, adolescent time of life, there's going to be ups and downs of moods. But when it becomes, the emotions are so out of control that you're not sure they're super irritable or they're super low, again, pay attention to those factors. Irritability is another one. Your child will all of a sudden just flip out, like, where did that come from? Sometimes you'll see that irritability, and underneath it might be a depressed mood. Isolation. So if you're seeing these self-injuring behaviors and there's the other concerning factors, then it's time to seek professional help. Am I in your way? I just realized. Do not use counseling as a form of punishment or consequence. Please, please don't do that. That makes my job and Dave's job that much more difficult. Believe it or not, I get a child in my office looking at me like, oh, I wrecked it. Thanks. Okay, me and technology. But no, okay, so going back to this, it does, if I get that child in my office looking at me like, who do you think you are? And so I'm working that much harder to engage them, to say, you know what, this is for you. This is to get you help with whatever you might need that's going on. Often kids are pretty good. We have to just work a little harder when they see it as punishment. I just want to make sure I'm all right. Seek out a mental health professional, such as a clinical psychologist or a clinical social worker. Some families will talk with their family doctor. While your child is getting professional help, there are still a few things that you can do to support your child, such as fostering a protective home environment. Modeling healthy ways to manage stress. Keeping communication open. How was your day at school, son? What was something you learned today? You know, anything, however you communicate with your children. Uphold family time. Maintain the child's contribution to the family's chores and responsibilities. Sometimes I'll have parents come into my office and they're very concerned, and then they're not sure how to move forward. And they suddenly feel like, should I be walking on eggshells? I don't want to set them off, being very concerned. And no, that's not what you need to do. The child still needs to participate in whatever, if they're on dishes duty, you're on dishes duty, right? So you want to maintain that as much as possible. Upholding family time. Do you guys have games night at home? Doing that. I had... when we were talking as a group back in our office, my one colleague was like, have them bake bread together. So get creative as what sort of things can you do with your child, whether it's baking, cooking, doing yoga together, doing art, whatever it is. Modeling healthy ways to manage stress. We have all grown up to a certain point and being able to manage stress in some way. Is there any information as yourself you can pass on to your child that would be of benefit? Set limits and enforce consequences for everyday actions as needed. This does not mean consequencing the self-harming behaviors. If your child screws up and does something they weren't supposed to, and typically have a consequence for those behaviors, consequence those behaviors. Should you consequence self-harming behaviors? You should not consequence self-harming behaviors, because then they're going to learn to hide it and hide it very well. And what we want to do is be able to support them through that and gain different coping skills in order to manage. Practice using positive coping skills together. Maybe your child will get some stuff from the counselor and bring it home, and then maybe they're sharing it and they're learning, okay, you know what, let's do yoga together, or let's do some mindfulness strategies together. We were listening to a mindfulness presentation this afternoon, and they were talking about there's some schools in Saskatchewan that are using mindfulness in the school systems, and it's whether it's 5 to 10 to 15 minutes a day. And mindfulness stuff is just things like everyday meditation, to deep breathing, to I like the coloring, because that coloring books for adults is such a fad right now. I really wish I had developed that, because it's like it seems to be making so much money, and I color with my kids all the time, and I'm like, oh. Anyways, off topic. Don't expect a quick fix, and avoid overscheduling. Sometimes our kids are from A to B to C to D, and they're like just run ragged at the end of the day. So maybe it needs to take a step back and reevaluate. Okay, is there too much going on for my child right now? Do I need to slow things down a bit? Biking, running, going for walks, going to an art class. All right, how can I help my child? In collaboration with your child, limit access to items used to self-harm. Don't police your child, but remove items such as razor blades if you know this is one method of self-harming. Research is very conflicting on this. I read as many articles that said remove items that said don't remove items. So I'll give you what I know. If you know your child is using a razor to cut and they're very impulsive and your child is okay to give up those razors, then take away the razors. Some of the articles I also read said if a child has one means of coping, such as cutting, or a self-harm of some behavior, and you remove the one and only item that they use to cope, you're going to create greater distress for them. I would strongly encourage that you work in collaboration with your child to limit that access. Adolescents can be very impulsive, so if you remove those items, it takes that many more steps in order for them to access those items before they're going to engage in such behaviors. Attend to minor cuts. If it's a minor cut, can you attend to the injury at home, or is there a need to seek medical help? So having you understand, although it's a very difficult situation, can you attend to that without immediately running to the ER? So responding, but not necessarily overreacting. If that makes sense, there's a continuum there. Taking care of yourself. That's very important because you need to, and I always tell my parents that you have to take care of yourself in order to help your child. It's very easy for us to just always be attending to our children's needs and those sorts of things and then run ourselves ragged. You're not going to be very effective for your child if you're not in your game, right? So making sure if you like to go for a walk, or if you like to go running, or if you need to go to a movie, or whatever that strategy is for you, if you need to talk to somebody, maybe you need to get your own counselor to talk to. Maybe you have a really great friend that you need to go for coffee with. Whatever it is you need to do, I want you to be taking care of yourself. As your child's getting help from their counselor, by all means, they're going to be passing information on to you as to how to support their child. But if you need that extra help, get it for sure. And learning about self-harm. You're here, fantastic, you're learning about it. Did lots of stuff on the internet over the last few weeks. There's lots of information out there, and we have a couple of pamphlets. Sorry, I've completely ignored you. There's pamphlets here that we'll have afterwards for you guys to hand out, or for me to hand out to you, on self-harming behaviors. And I wanted you guys to know, I just went to the Regina Public Library. Actually, I just went online to the Public Library, and you can get books like this is just from the library. And Helping Teens Who Cut, Understanding and Ending Self-Injury. This talks about strategies and certain therapies that would be used in self-injury. But if you're wanting information and say you don't know how to use all this technology stuff like me, but I did get this off of online by myself, you can too. Alternatives. Your child's counselor may give your child some self-soothing strategies or distraction. Okay, so distractions and self-soothing strategies are not long-term fixes, but they're good alternatives to self-harm in the short term. So some self-soothing strategies could include, and this is just looking at the different senses. So sound, listening to music that maybe is comforting. Touch, warm baths, cold showers. Oral, chewing gum, drinking ice water, crunching ice. I've had kids squeeze ice because just gets that sensation. Smell, whether it's scented candles, potpourri, baths with scented soap. Movement, being active, walking, working out, punching a pillow, ripping newspapers or books, smashing Play-Doh. This website at Adolescent Self-Injury Foundation, they had this one article, 146 things to do instead of self-injure. And I thought that was really neat because it had everything from like pet my cat, go to a movie. Like it was a lot of different strategies, but what you can do is get your child involved. Okay, what sort of things can we do? If you haven't heard, that one is snapping the elastics or bands on the wrist. All right, the connection. So self-harm and thoughts of suicide are two separate things, but there is a connection. And it's important to, if it goes beyond situations of self-harming and it moves more into thoughts of suicide, you really have to attend to that. And now I'm going to turn it back over to Dave.
So, thoughts of suicide. We've been talking about one particular way of managing stress, and now we want to talk about one that is much more difficult in a lot of ways to talk about. And I just want to be really clear about that right off the bat, that this is not something that's easy to talk about. No parent obviously wants to think about suicide or thoughts of suicide in relation to their kids, let alone anybody else. I have no doubt that in a room, a group this size, there are people here who have lost loved ones to suicide. Probably all of us either know someone or know of someone who has died by suicide. So we want to be very, very respectful of that when we talk about this. And in light of that, kind of in respect to that, I think it's really important that we talk about what some things are that we can do to maybe identify a little bit better when somebody is really struggling to the point where they might be having thoughts of suicide. How to identify that? Then it's not an exact science by any means either, but maybe there's some things that we can do to get a little bit better at it, and then what we can do to help them once we know that in fact that's what's happening, that they are having thoughts of suicide. Okay, and it's really important that if you're talking about youth that are having thoughts of suicide, not only they need help, but their parents very often can benefit from support as well, whether that's from a counselor, a clergy person, just some friends or whatever it is. But remember, just like Natasha was talking about self-care and looking after ourselves, that's absolutely essential when we're talking about this issue as well. Just a couple of myths about suicide, first of all. Youth with thoughts of suicide are only seeking attention or trying to manipulate others. And this is something that you hear a lot. They're saying that just because they want attention. Well, maybe they are doing it for attention, but a couple of things about that. First of all, obviously, given what the seriousness of what the potential is, we cannot afford not to take it seriously, even if we think that they don't mean it and they're just doing it or saying something for attention. And the other thing is, even if it is for attention, like one of our directors at Airlo, Linda Meyer, says, if they're looking for attention, then give them some. Because maybe what there is here is an opportunity for you to find out from them what is it that makes you so in need of attention right now? What is it that you're struggling with? And you can maybe help them in that way. So just thinking of them as just being attention-seeking is sometimes an easy way to just dismiss it, and it's really important that we don't. Suicide is always sudden and unpredictable, and very often when it happens, it very much seems that way, and probably a lot of us are aware of that. There are, though, a lot of ways and things that we can maybe look at or become aware of in somebody that might indicate to us that they're really struggling and that they're having a difficult time. And I'm going to spend a bit of time talking about what some of those things are and what you do with it when you realize that. And talking about suicide with a young person we're concerned about will increase the risk. I think this is very often a concern, that if I ask a young person who I know is really struggling if they're having thoughts of suicide, that I might plant that idea in their mind, and when it wasn't there before. And the best research tells us that that's generally not the way it works. That if they weren't thinking about it before, they're not going to think about it just because you suggested it. If they're not thinking about it, when you ask them if they are, they will likely tell you exactly that they are not. And they might have some other choice words for you as well. But, because that's happened to me. But, yeah, so you don't increase the risk by asking them. And in fact, what very often happens is, if you think about somebody who's struggling and is having thoughts of suicide, very often they don't know if this is something that I can talk to anybody about. And so by asking them the question, you're opening a door for them. And maybe they're relieved. In fact, very often when you do this, you notice that people are relieved when somebody asks them the question, because now they know, okay, this is something that I can talk about with this person. I didn't know that I could talk to anybody about this because of what it is. So that's more likely what happens, is that You're not increasing their risk. In fact, the opposite, that you might be opening a door for them to talk about something that they didn't think they could talk about. And that's not just true for young people, that's true for adults as well. So how will we know if somebody is really struggling to the point that they might be having thoughts of suicide? Not an exact science by any means, but there are things that we can be aware of. And there's kind of 4 different categories of these, and I'm going to talk about each one. And the first one is they may express thoughts that are concerning. So things that they actually say, and I'll give you examples of all of these. They may act in ways that are unusual or out of character for them. And that goes back to what we talked about right at the beginning, about how this is atypical behavior and atypical emotional responses. Okay? We might observe from their emotions that something is troubling them. So that's more about just the sense that you get from somebody that, wow, they don't seem to be themselves today. They seem to be really down. So those are emotional things that you might get from some things they say, but it might be just a sense that you get from somebody that you know pretty well. And finally, we might notice physical things about them that represent some sort of a change. And so we'll give you examples of all of those. So first of all, hints in their words. So if you hear a young person saying something like, "Nothing matters anymore. I wish I were dead." I mean, that's a pretty clear indicator, obviously. "No one cares about me." Some of these are a little bit more vague, but if you're listening, you might notice some real distress in a statement like that. "No one cares about me. I can't do anything right." So just that feeling of futility. "It'll be over soon." If you hear a statement like that, then I would very definitely want to explore that a little bit and find out what they mean by that. So those are things that you might hear in their words, and there's lots of other things as well. Hints in their actions or behaviors. Lots of different things here. Giving things away. This is something that people who are approaching a point where they might act on their thoughts of suicide very often do, is they give special things away to special people in their life. Withdrawing from people activities, so just isolating a whole lot more. Loss of interest in things that they used to really like doing. All of a sudden a kid who is a hockey player and loved to hang out with friends and that sort of thing, all of a sudden just isn't showing any interest in that stuff anymore and is doing more isolating. Abuse of alcohol and drugs, and especially if that's a change, if that's something that is not typical for a young person. Impulsivity. Again, especially when it's a change, if they become very impulsive and act in ways that are surprising to you and that you haven't seen before. So there's some things in actual behaviors. A little bit more here. Lack of ability to concentrate. I'm aware of a situation where it wasn't a young person, it was an adult, I think she was in her 30s, who died and by suicide. And what her coworkers said was that for the period of time before, like several weeks before, this is a very competent individual in her work, and suddenly she couldn't remember how to do things. And she would suddenly be looking to her coworkers for help with something that she had done 100 times before. So just an inability to concentrate and to focus and to know things that she knew before. And extreme behavior changes of many different kinds. And just emotional responses that we might notice. So again, these are things that are not necessarily in their words, but just things that we observe by how the person carries themselves, their facial expressions, their body language, and maybe in addition to their words. So just a sense of desperation, loneliness, hopelessness, apathy, just not caring about stuff anymore, poor self-esteem, feeling really inadequate. They can't do anything good enough or anything right. Feelings of guilt about something. Inability to regulate their emotions in a normal way. We've talked about that many times, so here it is again. So just, things happen where there's an emotional response, and what you see is just sort of over the top. It's like an extreme emotional response, and they can't regulate it. And this is an interesting one, this last one. Sudden sense of calm or relief after a period of emotional difficulty. So imagine that you know someone who has been really, really struggling for a period of time, and then all of a sudden one day it seems like the switch has been turned on and everything is better. Now, our normal response to that obviously would be, wow, fantastic, she's having a good day, he's having a good day. What might be happening there, and this happens sometimes, is that there's a great deal of turmoil when people are undecided. They're thinking about suicide, but they haven't made that decision. And then one day they make the decision. They haven't done it yet, but they've decided that they're going to. And it's like a weight is lifted off. And then you're going to see sometimes a very different emotional response. And it might appear that somebody is doing much, much better. So it's, obviously we hope that what's happening is that they're doing much better, but it might be something that you just want to be aware of because it does happen sometimes. So those are things in those 4 areas that you might notice, that you might hear, that you might see in their behaviors, that might kind of clue you in that something is going on with this person that maybe I should explore a bit. And in addition, I'm getting ahead of myself. One more, the physical or health-related changes. So things like changes in sleep patterns, loss of appetite, loss of weight, physical health complaints. So things like, a kid has stomach aches a lot or headaches a lot, that sort of thing. Changes in personal hygiene or personal appearance. So you might have a young person who typically really cares a lot about how they look. They got to dress really trendy, have clothes from the certain place, the hair's got to be just right, stuff like that. And then all of a sudden you notice they just don't seem to care about that stuff anymore. And their hygiene is not what it was. Their appearance is not what it was. There's something going on there. Because for a lot of young people, it's really important how they present themselves to the world. And if they're really, really struggling, then sometimes that just sort of goes out the window and they don't care about it anymore. So the other thing that's important in conjunction with this, so all of those things, which are things you might observe or see or hear, but it's also really helpful to know, is there some sort of a trauma or loss or some really significant, difficult event that has happened in this person's life? And it could be a lot of things. It could be abuse. It could be family problems, like maybe a family or parental separation. Leaving home for the first time is a really difficult thing for a lot of kids. A death or a suicide in the family or of someone close. Rejection by friends or a partner. Bullying, which is such a huge problem these days, especially with social media and how the role that plays in bullying. Perceived failure. Financial problems would be more an issue for adults, of course. Academic problems. It's a difficult thing for a lot of young people. And mental health issues, things like depression, anxiety, that sort of thing. So if you know that something like one of these, or maybe more than one of these, has happened in a person's life, and you're also seeing some of those things on those previous slides in their behavior, in their emotional kind of presence, in the words that they say, and that sort of thing, then it might be a good idea to look into it and find out what's going on. Now, it's important to say, are those things that I just mentioned in the previous 5 slides, do these things necessarily mean that someone's having thoughts of suicide? Of course, they don't. Okay? Those are all things that happen in people's lives, and they're fairly common, a lot of them. And they don't necessarily mean that the person is having thoughts of suicide. But if you notice these things, and you notice kind of a combination of these things, it's kind of a matter of seeing the big picture. I'm seeing things in their behavior. I'm just getting a sense from them about their emotional state that's really different. They're saying some things that are sort of concerning to me. I know that they had difficulties with some bullying in the last little while. So you're sort of putting all of the pieces together, and they represent a real change, what you're seeing for the person. Then it might be that these factors are indicating some really troubling thoughts, and they might be indicators of deeper thoughts or darker thoughts, including things like thoughts of suicide, and then maybe it's time to explore that a little bit with the person. So again, it's not an exact science, but it's about being aware of the big picture, putting all of these pieces together. You know your children well, and you could think of, things that kind of get your spidey senses tingling a little bit. Something's going on here. I'm noticing this and this and this. Maybe I need to explore this a little bit with my kid. So then what do you do? So let's say that you are noticing a lot of those things with a child, with your child. Well, you talk to them in a supportive manner. You indicate to them what it is that you're observing and that you're concerned. So you might say something like, Jim, I noticed that you're missing a lot of hockey practices lately. You're not hanging out with your buddies as much as you used to. You're just spending a lot of time at home, and that's really unusual for you. You know, you're a little bit more irritable around the house and stuff like that, and I'm just wondering what's going on. Can you tell me what's going on? So tell them what it is that you're observing, and then encourage them, invite them to tell you what's going on, and just explore what's going on with them. Encourage them to share what it is that they're feeling. And if you do that, and after that conversation that the young person has opened up about some things to you, they still haven't said anything about suicide, but you're really concerned after having this conversation because maybe they're saying things like, nothing matters anymore. I don't even care anymore. I don't want to go to school. I don't care about hockey. I just want to be alone. Things like this that are really concerning. Then what you might have to do, and this is not an easy thing for anybody to do, and especially not when it's your family member, is you might have to ask them in a very caring and compassionate way, but it needs to be clearly and directly, are you thinking of ending your life? And a nice way to sort of go into that question is, again, give some of the rationale for your question before you ask it. So again, you might say something like, I can see from what you're saying that you're really distressed, that you don't care about hockey anymore, that even your relationship with Bob, who you've known forever, doesn't seem to matter as much. You just want to be alone. And sometimes when people feel all of those kind of things, they have some really, really negative thoughts and even think about harming themselves or killing themselves. Have you ever thought is that something that's crossed your mind, of ending your life? Of course, there's many ways to word it, and it's not easy to do. But it is important to ask clearly and directly. Just to ask, are you thinking of harming yourself, is not sufficient, because the child might say, or might think to themselves, no, I'm not thinking of harming myself. I'm thinking of killing myself. Remember, we were just talking about self-harm, and it's usually a very different thing. And so they might answer that question with a no. So you want to be really clear. What the research says about this is that if you ask a question in a very vague way, you're likely to get a vague response. And think of what the potential consequences are. You don't want a vague response. You want a very clear response. So things like, are you thinking of ending your life? Have you had thoughts of killing yourself? Is that part of what's going on for you? Really important to be clear about what it is that you're asking. And as I said before, hard question to ask, but often people with thoughts of suicide cannot say it on their own. Sometimes they do. Sometimes they just come out with it with somebody that they trust, whether it's a family member or a friend or a counselor or something. But very often they cannot say those words on their own. And so they need somebody to ask them. And like I said before, by asking them, what you're doing is you're opening the door. You're telling them, okay, I'm here. This is something that you can talk to me about, and I want to welcome you to do that. Okay, you're really opening the door for something that they maybe didn't know they could do at all. And if they say yes, I'm having thoughts of suicide. Whew, tough spot to be in. It says stay calm, don't panic. Easier said than done, obviously. And I would think, Natasha and I were talking about this yesterday, and I said the first thing you might want to do if your child says yes is throw your arms around them and tell them that you love them, right? But let them know that you care and that you wish to support them. Encourage them to tell you more if they want to. Maybe just having said what they just said, maybe they don't want to, and that's okay too. But keep that door open. Tell me more. What's going on? I didn't realize that things were so hard for you. Okay? Empathy, lots of empathy. So right now, just like Natasha was saying before, the important thing right now is just to listen, to let them tell you what they need to tell you. Sometimes if you ask the question and they say yes, then that's all they can say right now. Sometimes because you've opened that door for them, they will tell you a whole lot more. And it's important just to provide an opportunity for them to say what they need to say. And what then? Well, as a parent, I think the best thing is to tell the child that you want to get more help for them and that you will connect them with someone who's more prepared. And maybe that's a school counselor, maybe it's a counselor in the community, maybe it's going to the doctor, whatever that is. But you need to tell them, I'm going to help you get to some more help. okay? Because this isn't something that you can carry on your own as a parent. You need to get more help for this. If you feel there's an imminent risk, if because of some things the child has said to you, you're thinking, wow, I mean, this is serious, they have thought about what they might do and that sort of thing, and there might be an imminent risk here today or tomorrow, then you need to make sure that the child is supervised, and going to the hospital might be the best thing, or calling mobile crisis. Okay, so in that case, you certainly don't want to leave them unsupervised. And finally, down at the bottom there, don't agree to keep it a secret. And very often children will, or young people will say, don't tell anybody. And what you can say to them is, you know what, this is so important and it's about your safety and your well-being that there are some people that I'm going to have to talk to about this, whether it's the counselor, whether it's the principal, whether it's your doctor, whether it's your dad or your mom. There are some people that we need to talk to about this, but I promise you, I will not talk to anybody that I don't need to. So just let them know that you're going to respect their confidentiality as much as you possibly can, but that there are people that need to be in the know about this. And these are just, these numbers are in the book, but I've got the numbers here for mobile crisis and also the Regina Crisis Suicide Line. They're both right in the very front of the phone book, so you could look them up there. And as I said, attend the hospital emergency ward. If you think that there is a real imminent risk, then that's one of the best things to do. It's what they're there for. And this is fairly obvious too, but what kind of approaches are helpful or not helpful? And it's very much like what Natasha said before about what's helpful for self-harming. Important to be really empathetic, to be calm, to be caring, non-judgmental, and patient, okay? And it is not helpful to be angry, panicked, dismissive, or critical. And I know that's really easy to say, but especially if you look at something like panicked, I mean, a lot of parents, you get that sort of news from your child, that might be a tendency to go there. But if you can, just take a deep breath, let them know that you're going to do what you can to help them, and try to refrain from panic, because it will be helpful for them if you are able to. When you are assisting someone, it is not your responsibility as a parent to solve all of their problems. Obviously, you've just received some information that requires some action of you, but it is not your responsibility to solve all of these problems. Your job is to listen empathetically, help them get connected with someone with more experience or more training, who can help them to develop a safety plan and to figure out just exactly what is their level of risk and that sort of thing. And who are some resources that we can connect you with in the community? What kind of things can you do? All of that sort of thing. And again, if you think the risk is imminent, you don't want to leave the person alone. If you are traumatized by helping someone with thoughts of suicide, and we've talked about this before, it's so important that you look after yourself. So self-care is such an important thing. And I would say in most cases, if a parent is receiving this sort of information from a child and they have to take some steps to get some safety and some help for their child, that's a very, very difficult thing. And I don't know of any parents really who could do that without requiring somebody to at least debrief with, whether it's a friend or somebody. And in many cases, going and talking with somebody, a professional person about it, can be really, really helpful too. Because you need to do what you need to do to keep yourself healthy as well, right? So it's a very difficult subject to talk about, but like I said, given the fact that it happens more often than maybe some of us are aware, it's really important that we do talk about it, and that we take some steps to maybe become a little bit more prepared to be able to see what's happening in a young person's life and to identify something's going on here. Something is different, something has changed. And I know about some other things that have happened in their life. Maybe I need to talk to them about this and see what's going on. Really, really important. So just to conclude, and this is our last slide, and look at that, it's exactly 8 o'clock. So kids and teens, and this is just kind of more of a general statement, will develop the best coping skills when they know they are supported and that they can be open about you with their difficulties. So Natasha's talked before about keeping those lines of communication open, and it's so important so that young people know that no matter what is going on in their life, they can come to you and they can talk to you. That's when they're going to develop the best coping skills. And for parents, for you folks, supporting children who are really struggling can be challenging. You may feel you could benefit from support as well. Seek out whatever the help is that you need, whether it be speaking with other family members or friends or accessing other resources in the community, and that could be a wide variety of people, friends, professional counselors, clergy, lots of different opportunities, but you need to do what you need to for yourself. That's all we have. So what we would like to do, I think, is just have a little bit of time for some questions or discussion. And we might not be able to answer all of your questions, but we'll certainly do what we can.